Warning: the following program may contain material not be suitable for all audiences. Listener discretion is advised.
They say for every light in this world, there is a shadow waiting to reclaim it. We've been told what to believe, what to fear, and exactly where the boundaries of real end. But tonight, we're crossing those lines. From the whispers in the attic to the lights in the desert sky, and the entities that walk among us, we are stepping behind the veil. Transmitting from deep within the mountains of West Virginia, it's time to seek the truth. This is Let's Find Out with Diego. And now, here is your host, Diego the Podcaster.
On this episode of Let's Find Out, our guest is an author, an independent researcher exploring the crossroads of history, science, and unexplained phenomenon. Raised in the Ozarks, he studies folklore, anomalous experiences, and enduring mysteries. These projects lay the groundwork for a broader inquiry into how myth, environment, and biology intersect, whether we're searching for giants, extraterrestrials, or unraveling the mysteries of the Ozarks. You know our guest is right in the middle of them all. All this plus more. Please welcome our good friend, researcher, and author of Ancient Ozarks and Alien Harvest, F.K. Sterling. F.K., my friend, welcome to Let's Find Out.
Hello. Nice to be here.
Yeah, I'm happy to have you here, my friend. You know, I could probably spend a good 30 minutes in an introduction just talking about what you've done, what you've written, and the research that we're going to talk about tonight. But let me start with this first because I know very little about the Ozarks. And the only thing that made Ozarks, I guess, famous nowadays is because there's a show on Netflix called Ozarks. Jason Bateman. And it's not, I don't think it's a great representation of the Ozarks, but I guess it's supposed to be something dark and gritty for entertainment purposes only. You originally grew up in Florida, but then you moved to Arkansas.
When I was a teenager, yes.
Right. And then you spent a good amount of time there. How was life in the Ozarks? And for us that don't know, never been to that area, what kind of culture did you experience there?
Well, it's the area I live in. People here go back hundreds of years, and everybody pretty much in town knows your dad and knows your grandpa and knows your whole family. It's a very, how we see, small, sectarian, uh, deeply connected community. And everybody knows everybody else. So part of that is you can't do something without your neighbor knowing about it, and soon everybody in town knows about it. It's a very, people are talking about little things, but the big questions, the big mysteries, that's something that actually scares people, and they don't want to talk about that. There are things that you'll bring up out of curiosity, and you will hear a great silence, and people will just change the subject. Other things, like just going up to the bank and talking about your chickens and your grandchildren or something, that's perfectly acceptable. Or something you hear in a Sunday sermon, that's perfectly acceptable. But you want to make the big cosmic questions. It scares people. Part of it's because this is the Bible Belt. And when you start talking about extraterrestrials and crop circles and harvesting human DNA, kind of flies in the face of your assurance that you have about God and the Bible and things like that. For me, it doesn't do that. I'm a Mormon, and I believe in the plurality of worlds and the eternal progression. So it doesn't bother me. It doesn't bother the other Mormons here in this community. But, your typical Bible Belt Baptists, I believe it scares them to a large degree, and they're hesitant to admit things they've seen, things they've heard that are of unusual nature, which are a bizarre nature. And it is something that I needed to investigate further and kind of attempt to break the silence. The Ozarks are not mountains. They are exposed rock from a prehistoric inland sea, a shallow sea that existed in this area during the Paleozoic and Mississippian periods of geologic time. And so over time, it eroded the limestone and the bedding and eventually shaped what exists today. The caverns, the cave systems, the mountains. It wasn't made by tectonic plate shifts and the coming together of those elements like the Appalachians or the Rockies. This is very primal. It's the oldest exposed rock formation in this North American continent, if not the world.
And with what you just said there, you're talking about caves, you're talking about something ancient that people aren't quite
Yeah,
ready
in
to talk
ancient
about.
Ozarks, I talk about the mythology of the cave dwellers, and also this idea that the giant races of legend and of yore, protect hoards of silver and gold. And that's basically my take on the giant myth, combined with like the work of W.C. Jameson, who talks a lot about Spanish silver and Spanish gold. So I kind of combined the two and connected the dots between the giant myths, the cavern myths, and the myths of hidden treasure. So a lot of the different elements that exist about the ancient Ozarks I pulled together. In ancient Ozarks, I try to give a very grounded view of these mythologies because while in the other books I kind of take the liberty to be kind of wild and speculative, in ancient Ozarks I try to make it more grounded in real archaeology. But definitely Alien Harvest goes to the next level and has some very wild speculations, and it's terrifying and horrifying. Um, Gina at the Fox Den said, "I'm the next Stephen King," and I think that's the biggest compliment you could give me. And it is, I talk about corn stalks with embryos growing from it and blood and human DNA within the vegetation and the crops mixed in there, 35% human DNA, as if they're just growing humans through the vegetation. And I talk about reports of human faces coming out of the corn and just distorted, bloody appearances. Talk about bobbies, as they're called, or these little gray aliens who are just swarms of them coming in and out of the crops and hovering above the crops. These several UFOs that are obviously flying saucers that can be visible hovering above.
While you were growing in the Ozarks, and you were saying that a lot of the folks here didn't like talking about certain things. In that area, did you learn about these things as you were growing up there or after you moved from the
After
area?
I moved. After I
After,
moved.
okay.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's just like, my first experiences of hearing about some of these stories are just from some of the kids at Harrison High. And so it just kind of went from there growing up. Like we have what is said to be a haunted church right here off the square with demonic possession and various other elements. It was said that the clan held meetings in its basement, and what went on there was so evil that it tainted the church for generations. They eventually had to close it and condemn it.
Well, I can see why. With that kind of evil in that church,
Yeah,
that could bring an awful lot of negative, I'll say
yeah,
negative energy, but we can go on and on with the horrible things that were going on at that time. So in that area, a lot of states are known for certain things, towns are known for certain things. What are the Ozarks known for? Like here in West Virginia, we're known for Mothman, Bigfoot, and the Grafton Monster.
one of the things that we're known for is uh, the blue man, which is just another term, I believe, to say with Bigfoot. Another one is the folk monster, and that actually is been best represented in the movie from 1974, Legend of Boggy Creek. And then there is uh, the Ozark Howler.
Yeah.
And that is basically a mixture of Scots Irish legends of the Banshee, whose wail foretells the coming of death, and indigenous myths that could all the way go back to cultural memories of saber-toothed cats during the Paleolithic period. When you had great predatory cats, because the Ozark Howler is described as very panther-like, with big incisors and glowing red eyes. But unlike what we think the Smilodon had, which was more like a lion type coloring, the Ozark Howler is described as jet black. So it's got this ominous, death-like presage appearance.
Does the area have any kind of wildlife that would kind of resemble that? Maybe like a
Well,
large
there's
cat.
been legends where there was a circus going through the Ozarks, and several wild animals got loose, including some panthers and a gorilla, and that might be adding to legends of Sasquatch and the Ozarks. So there's been a lot of speculation that there was just some animals that got loose during the many years of wandering circuses and that they couldn't contain. Now, there was an incident where they knew there were certain animals that got loose. They were able to kill the cats, but the gorilla got loose and they never were able to find it. So, and then there's bears. We have large bears. And that could be misinterpreted as a Bigfoot. But I think there's really truth to this speculation of Sasquatch here in the Ozarks because it's just so widespread. And like I said, for years it was called the Blue Man. But I think now with the term Sasquatch and Bigfoot, I think there's getting to be a great awareness that there is something out there. Todd Neese, who is a known eyewitness, was just telling me a couple months ago that his neighbor said that right in a bluff not too far from where he lived, there was a Bigfoot right there. So there's a lot of reports, and when you go down to Newton County and you're driving on the street, you always see the cutouts of Bigfoot on the side of the road. I mean, it's just the iconography is unmistakable. There seems to be a growing awareness that this whole area is rife with Bigfoot eyewitness accounts.
So in today's time, is kind of now okay to talk about these subjects as compared as 20, 30 years ago?
Yeah, it's still, it's getting to be more open, but like I said, there's still this silence that continues to this day. And it's just the culture here. There's certain things you say and certain things you don't.
Right. It's perfectly understandable. Sometimes people don't want to say anything in the fear of conjuring up something or maybe triggering a memory they wish to really bury deep inside and not really talk about anymore. So, I mean, it could
Yeah.
be kind of some of that as well. And with when I think of things that you're
Well,
talking
some of
about,
that, it's just if you say something that's not accepted,
mm,
it gets around pretty quick. And the fear of rejection and embarrassment is definitely there. I mean, that's why certain people don't report UFO sightings. Well, here it's just double so because of the type of community we have. The fact that someone could say, "Oh yeah, I got abducted by an alien," and then in a week, everybody in town knows this, that you said this, and half the people are ridiculing you for saying it, saying you're crazy. That's a pretty good reason to hesitate to talk about these things freely. There's not that openness.
right? Which now that kind of reminds me because you don't want to be that guy in town. They shoot you out of town or eventually embarrass you enough never to speak again.
Yeah.
But you know more than anybody else. Yeah, I'm going to take in the subject of giants for a second
Mm-hmm.
because it's relatable to what we're going to be talking about. Because you're talking about, you mentioned cave systems. When I think of cave systems, sometimes I think about things that were left behind in caves or found in caves, whether they're drawings on the walls themselves or
Yeah,
bones.
petroglyphs. And I talk about in ancient Ozarks of a group of beings I call the antler people in underground caverns in underground civilization. And this is linked out to the southwest in the underground realms where the ant people live, who are the people who preserved the original indigenous people during a time of catastrophe and then led them back to the surface and taught them the fundamentals of civilization. And I believe that this whole civilization you could actually follow across the continents to East Asia with Shambhala and Agartha. So I link a vast underground system, and I link the antler people as the embodiment of this group of creatures in the Ozarks.
And when these
And I
discoveries get,
identify him with Cyrano, who was a Celtic god. He was a horned Celtic god.
with these discoveries, and it's funny because when people report things, they feel they're going to be embarrassed, but there's other something more dangerous to being embarrassed is being found out in a sense of when either a farmer or somebody winds up in a cave somehow exploring, finds this, I'm going to say the bones of giants. When you tell somebody, it gets the attention of the wrong people because people come, take the bones, they disappear.
Yes, Smithsonian, the cover up. And I said in my latest book that it wasn't a matter of a cover up, a conspiracy, as much as it was just the way they filed it. They filed it in a certain way that it just disappeared. You know what I mean? It wasn't this, oh, we got to conceal it from the public because they can't handle it. That would be a conspiracy.
Mm.
They simply filed it away in a way that was not retrievable. Like they'd say, well, this is actually, it results of pituitary disease. So then when you go back and you're looking for the bones of real giants, you can't find it because it's not recorded in the same way. Can I see what I'm saying?
I do. So there's no record. Like it's not like they have a Dewey Decimal System for ancient giants or bones like that.
Exactly. So it's the system of filing that lost it. So really, as far as the Smithsonian is concerned, they didn't hide it to conspire against the American people. They just filed it out of hand, and it got lost in translation. And so I think that that's the real thing, because they were classifying a lot of these remains under different categories and different things. So if you were to look at the right category in the Smithsonian, you might actually find these remnants, but it would be very hard. Another thing is how archaeologists were interpreting these remains. They were interpreting them in a way that didn't give credence to their reality. So it was more academic determinism rather than just saying, "Oh, we're gonna hide this from everybody. It's just too much. It's too great of a deal. We wanna not have total disclosure." I don't think that was the case. And I don't think it's the same as the alien phenomenon, where there probably is definitely a disclosure issue where the government is hiding things. But there is a reason the government would want to hide extraterrestrial realities. It's because they have technology and knowledge that could be useful militarily against our foes. And that's why with UFOs, secrecy is so important. With giants, we don't have that same secrecy unless these discoveries go along with some type of hidden ancient technology. Then that might be an impetus to hide.
And did you go more into depth with that in Search of Giants?
Yes, I did. I talked about that. Yes.
And the lineage of these giants, a lot of people have very different interpretations or theories where they could have come. Some say they were from Atlantis. Some say there's an alien race of Nordics. I mean, I don't think they were 20 feet tall, 13 feet tall, but I don't know how a lot of that is linked. I don't really know where the genesis.
I talk about Atlantis and Thule, the northern Atlantis, and I link them to Nordic extraterrestrials and different European-like beings who were well over 6'7", 6'8". But I also mention that there were other ethnic types that were also uniquely tall, like the Polynesians. Ancient Polynesians were exceptionally tall. There were different peoples in Africa who were also exceptionally tall. And even today, when you see these exceptionally tall populations, I believe they're a throwback to the intermixture between these tall individuals and these giants with smaller individuals. So then you have a more staggered appearance of uniquely tall individuals, where you'd get a shorter one coming up for several generations. Then suddenly you're getting these tall basketball players who are like 6-7 foot, and they can just go up to the basketball rim with their ball and just drop it right through the hoop because they're so tall.
Right.
So
And because giants, we can go on forever and have different theories, or actually not just theories, because your information comes from the actual research in itself. Because not everything that's giant can be related to a Nephilim or extraterrestrial. There's got to be somewhere in there
yeah,
where,
there is.
yeah,
There's not just one type of giant. There's many different gradations of giants and types of giants, like Sasquatch. He's definitely a giant, but he's of a different type. I identify a cryptid in Antarctica that's been reported, who I call Homo borealis. that has blubber and white fur and blue eyes, and it's, I believe, a hominin, and I believe it descends from the Denisovans who got into South America and made the cross right down there at the bottom when the sea level was lower, and it was shorter distance between the bottom tip of South America and Antarctica. There wasn't a land bridge, but it was easy to get down there, and Antarctica was much warmer. So they could go down there, they could survive, and then as it got colder, they began to adapt and evolve. And over time, they became completely different, completely animalistic, survival based, but very, very intelligent. But they could survive in the extreme cold because, like other animals who do survive in Antarctica, there has to be thick blubber and fur to keep warm in that environment. And so it's definitely like a Yeti or an abominable snowman, but very hardy, very intelligent, and very, very elusive.
And they are. But speaking of Antarctica,
And I'm coming up with a book.
yeah,
It's called The White Watchers of Antarctica. Monsters, Ruins, and UFOs of the Southern Continent. And it's coming out pretty soon.
you kind of beat me to the punch, FK. Because every time I hear the word Antarctica, something comes up in my mind where, and I'm not just talking about Admiral Byrd, because that's a whole different thing there.
Yeah.
But there's reported that there's a place in Antarctica, I don't know if it's in a dead center, where there's actually a lush forest or rainforest there, or where there's actually warm.
Underneath I talk about this in the book. Underneath the glaciers, there's enough hydrothermal energy that it provides these warm pockets under the glacier, under the ground, that if you were to descend to a certain degree and get in these cave systems that are thermally heated, you're going to have a very different environment than the surface conditions. And this is another area, too, that this Homo borealis could be hiding away in.
What's the closest we've gotten to seeing such a thing?
Well, there's numerous reports, and I talk about it in the book. And there is, government officials, there are scientists that report, strange footprints in the snow, images of a dark, hulking figure running through the snow at a great distance. So yeah, and there's been things on camera that are inexplicable that look human, but not quite human.
What do you think their population is as compared to? I mean, we're what, in a billion now on Earth, humans.
Yeah, I think it's a very small population. It would be hard to sustain a large population with the type of environment that is in Antarctica. So it would be a small population subsisting on fish or whatever they could find.
And that makes sense, because there's also a report of, if you're looking into biblical, because some of them, and I know I'm jumping all over the place, they're known to be cannibals or cannibalize each other or eat humans.
Yeah,
not as much the case now, I guess, because now this is not really our neighbors anymore, sort of say.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, I'm not sure. I mean, if you're just surviving on fruits and vegetables and eating plants, that's great. I'd rather than them have that kind of diet than us.
Antarctica doesn't have a lot of fruits and vegetables,
right?
Unless they're underneath these pockets that we were talking about with the warmer environment, where there could be vegetative growth, maybe fruit or something of that nature that survived when Antarctica was all warm, and it took seed and then grew when the thermal energy heated up those areas, making
Sure.
that growth possible.
I mean, they could be underground streams or lakes where they could be fish too. They might be able to eat fish as well. But
Yeah.
it's very fascinating because when people mention giants, it goes all over the place. Archaeology doesn't really discuss that as much. You're known to be more of an alternative archaeologist. And I'm going to go this route real quick with you because since we're not looking into conspiracy type things, but I'm going to call this a regular Joe Lunchpail archaeologist. They learn their craft, they're very educated to go out there and do the work.
Yeah.
But there's another level
Well,
of
my
archaeology.
training is in conventional archaeology and anthropology and art history. I got a degree from Arizona State University in those subjects. So I have official training, academic training in these fields, but I chose to go beyond what academics do. And I'm not welcome in their circles, but I take the knowledge I learned and I apply it to what I think is the truth.
Was interesting because there are some circles I'm not welcome in either. But I'm talking about the same things they're talking about. I don't know how that works, but that's something for another day. But I'm gonna get back to the point I was gonna make, and if I can just gather my thoughts correctly. The average lessons or in college or university of archaeology, are they streamlined to think in a certain way? What is it that they're not looking? What are they ignoring?
Well, they have certain, what I would call almost ideological consistencies in their thinking. One of those regarding the ancient Americas is this idea that the Native Americans all descend from one population who came across the Bering Strait, and that every accomplishment of the New World was independent in their own brilliance. And if you question that, you're a racist, you're a colonialist, and you're not looking at the evidence. Now, the evidence says that, first of all, we know that there were more than one population coming across the Bering Strait. The first population was the ANE, the Ancient North Eurasians, who were Proto-Caucasian, and then they mixed with the East Asians, who are also coming from Siberia, and then over time, through genetic drift and other sexual selection, their physical morphology changed. Now, if what they don't tell you from the university is, yes, if they were genetically tested, their haplogroups and their genome would match most of the time with the existing indigenous tribes that are there in North America. But there's a reason for that, because their ancestry is the same, but through evolution, their morphology has changed over time. The Native Americans today look different than how they did 10,000 years ago with Kennewick Man and Spirit Caveman. And they have a different level of admixture. Back then, they were almost 100% ancient North Eurasians. The best way to look at an ancient North Eurasian is the Terra mummies of Western China, who were tall, who were blonde or auburn hair, who had elongated faces, high bridged noses, high brow ridges, and these were not Europeans as previously thought. They were completely isolated non Europeans, but Europeans of the North and ancient Americans share the ancient North Eurasians as a common ancestor. So the ancient North Eurasians are ancestral to both groups. So we both, the Europeans and the Native Americans, have their DNA in our genome. So that's why there's so many overlapping appearances in morphology. That's why people report, Europeans reported when they came here that they saw blonde Native Americans and people who looked European. It's because of this ancient North Eurasian admixture, which is like 50% in ancient Americans.
This kind of helps answer some of the questions I was going to answer these questions now with the giants, because they were reported to be very tall, very huge things. I know we talked about that before.
I mean, the Book of Mormon talks about the Jaredites who came from the Tower of Babel, and they were very tall individuals. So, like, even in Egypt, they have a pharaoh with red hair that was 6'7". In Italy, they have another blonde mummy that was 6'7". In Northern Europe, the Cro-Magnons were about that height. So we have already physical proof that people in ancient times in certain areas were very tall, while the majority of people were very, very short. So compared to those shorter people, a 6'7" or 6'8" individual was a giant. And I also believe they had advanced technology that we long since forgot over time through catastrophe or just losing, kind of like in the way that we lost technology from Rome after Rome fell. There was a disaster, and in that trauma, we lost considerable technology.
Sure. I mean, you could put it into today's time. If everything goes belly up, right? We had to start over. Very few people are going to be able to recreate some things. We're pretty much going to be going back into living in squalor, because not everybody knows how to make gasoline. Not everybody knows how to do computer chips or create electricity. So, technology comes up to this direction, and then it falls again.
Same thing happened in the Bronze Age collapse as it did with the fall of Rome. The Bronze Age collapse happened in the 1100s BC, and when the Bronze Age ended, Egypt fell, one of its major kingdoms fell, and much of Europe descended into darkness. When I say Europe, I'm talking about Greece and the Italian peninsula and Mesopotamia, Turkey, etc., etc.
And when I think of those times, was it one who was I want to say a general and emperor? Was it Maximus Thrax? Was the name of him? Where I believe
he was very tall.
Yeah,
he was very tall. Yeah.
So, and it is, you kind of helped me in my mind reveal something where, if I'm an average height guy, I'm not only 5'9", 5'9", right? To me, 6 foot is a giant to me. 6'3", 6'4", 7 foot, they're giants to me. When we're talking about ancient giants, we're talking about more than 10,000 years ago. The reported ones are 20, 25 feet tall. Was that never the case? Or they're only within...
Well, the problem is that the amount of stress on the human form to be that height, to be 25 feet in height, would be enormous. And really, if they were that tall, the human anatomy would have to be different. The feet would have to be not human to hold the weight. Like an elephant, it doesn't have little human-like feet. It has to have a big, broad foot. So there would have to be some anatomical differences. It could just be like a large 20 foot tall human being walking around. Now, if you read the Bible and you read the Book of Enoch, you get the impression that these uniquely tall individuals did exist. The only thing I can say is if you look at a pre-flood argument, when there was a canopy, a different atmosphere, higher oxygen, we know from fossils that insects and different things got to be a very large size. So it's very possible that in the pre-flood, if that's the case, that there could have been individuals of enormous height. They just could have lived that way, and maybe it made it easier for their bodies to adjust. And they went extinct because when the environment changed, they could no longer sustain themselves.
And that makes sense because the stories I've read, mostly when giants go to war with humans, it just seems like that they never really they got the short end of the stick, to tell you the truth, because I'm thinking if they're so powerful, so advanced, they didn't fare very well with humans when it came to war. So I'm thinking that perhaps there might have been a misunderstanding that these may not have been these titans size humans, maybe just regular 6'5", 7 foot humans, and
Yeah, I
who,
mean, I think that
yeah,
that's in the case of Goliath, that was the
hmm
case. And I think the taller stature was an exaggeration.
it makes sense because sometimes I don't know if I know people who played sports, and sometimes they say, "Man, we go to these out of town games, and these players look like they're twice our size, but they're pretty much the same size. It's just you're going somewhere you don't know, you're a little intimidated by your opponent. They're gonna seem gigantic up until you really start playing the game. It's like, hey, they're just like us, but that's neither here or there. But I want to circle back to Alien Harvest because I'm looking at the cover of the book. I love the cover of the book. You have the UFO, the beam of lights coming down. You see a crop circle, and the questions will be about crop circles. It's been a long time since I've heard a story about crop circles or seen anything. It seems that it kind of just petered out after like the 90s or early 2000s. I didn't
Yeah.
always buy into the case of a handful of drunk teenage, well, not teenager, but college bound folks with a rope and a plank and going in circles and creating these great works of art that looks like it was just generated by a machine or an artist done overnight. It seems to me like a normal person would take weeks or days to do something so beautiful. What is your opinion of crop circles?
Well, in the case of Ozark Reapers, which is the sequel to Alien Harvest, the crop circles are part and parcel of a plan that has been in effect in the Ozarks for well over 100 years for the harvesting of human DNA. And the crops are used as the vehicle, as the delivery method for this harvesting and this growing, this farming of human genetic elements. So it has a genetic purpose behind it. And that's how also through the crop circles, they find portals and they move. Not only the individual bodies themselves, but the UFOs who create the crop circles that can then slide in to the crop circles and disappear into the other dimension as trans-dimensional beings and trans-dimensional crafts. And that's basically what the sequel's about. And then there's going to be a third book in the series called Night Dwellers. And that concentrates more on the gray aliens themselves. And I linked him to the moon-eyed people of the Cherokee and also the bluff dwellers of the 19th and early 20th century archaeological theory that modern archaeologists consider disproven, but which I resurrect and identify with extraterrestrials.
Because we're looking now into going to 3 books with Alien Harvest. What brought you to the Alien Harvest game? What inspired you to write that book?
Just the stories and the legends, not only from eyewitness accounts, but really investigating the lore in the library and on the net regarding Ozark traditions. And that really started to excite me, and I wanted to learn more about it. So the more I learned about it, the more I wanted to write books about it. And then I ended up, through my interest in local folklore, kind of mixed, my giants and my supernatural phenomena and my UFOs with the Ozark brand. And they came together and they worked very well and creating something new and innovative as far as literature is concerned.
How are you able to write so many books in what I would say to me a short amount of time? For you, it probably think, man, it's taking
Well, one of
forever.
the reasons is I try to write them as very short as possible. The one book that took me forever was In Search of Giants, and that's almost 600 pages.
Wow.
But these other books, they're only like around 70 to 80 pages. So, I have quick research. I use a computer. I outline them. I put them together. I use Grammarly to fix my grammar and my syntax and my presentation. And it usually takes me around a week or two to write a 72 word to 110 word book. And then as far as the formatting, the AI can take care of the formatting and the cover design, and they do a really good job. So I could turn out, like I said, in a good few weeks, a book, have it ready for upload. So,
And I know you're always hard at work because every time I'm texting you back and forth, you're working on something. And if you were to write a book outside of the giants, extraterrestrial or supernatural, what else would interest you in writing?
I would just like to write a space opera, like a Star Wars. Something that is how Star Wars originally was, which was a fun, exciting, wholesome adventure that was not political, that was not woke, that wasn't about messaging or DEI, that was about having fun when you watched it or read it, and exciting and just an adventure where you lose consciousness of political messaging and you just enjoy the story and the adventure, which is really where Star Wars originally was. And then I'd say the prequels pretty much too, but then when they got into the sequels, yeah, you could see the messaging there. And even Andor, well, Andor is a great series. It's very political and it's dark and it's not the fun, adventurous thing where you could actually have a good time. Like, you don't have a character like Han Solo and his partner Chewie who go back and forth and are almost like a humorous element that's natural, and you just love to hear the Slav and debonair and Rasky smuggler Han Solo. It was one of those things that were just so enjoyable to listen to. And without Han Solo, Star Wars wasn't Star Wars. Without Luke Skywalker and that innocence and that idealism and that longing for a better and more adventurous life, when that was taken out, and that whole mystique about manhood and coming of age, that's what drove Star Wars. When it became about, oh, we have to have a woman as the main thing, well, we don't, because there's nothing wrong with having a male role or a male-centered story. But in today's time, if you have a male-centered story, it's immediately framed as sexist and bigoted. And that's just such a distortion of how things are. And then we were just talking on Drunken Cryptids about this, and I won't get too much on the soapbox, but so much of our Americana and our American mythology and American folklore has been taken out of the schools. It's been taken out of our cultural life, and the kids growing up know nothing about that. They can tell you about every little bit of culture from Somalia. They can't tell you anything about the American folklore.
You know, it's definitely different times that we grew up with, a different world. And, and I stopped watching Star Wars stuff a long time ago because, in my opinion, is just became more of a cash cow. I mean, they can put in
Yeah.
something half-assed and then people will watch it, and that's okay. But, is it okay? I don't know. Like I said,
To me, Star Wars was sacred. It was something that was so profoundly unique. When they cheapened it, it was never the same.
yeah, I mean, but don't kill me though. But I was more of a Star Trek guy, and I watched everything
Well,
up
Star
until
Trek
Voyager.
did the same thing.
Yeah, because I love
They
Voyager. I
were
love
in
Deep
that.
Space. Yeah, not Deep Space Nine. Yeah, I was gonna say almost say Babylon 5, and I'm gonna get like pitchforked, and you'll see the tiki torches outside on fires. Like you said, Babylon 5. Come on now. No, but anyway, so one last question before we go, and I'm gonna challenge you on this one. It's gonna be coming out of left field. If you and I would go to revisit locations in the Ozark, where will we eat? What's the cuisine?
There is a place in El Pima. It's a diner, and it's on the right side of the road when you first go into town from Harrison. And they have corn fritters and fish baskets and these burgers. They're double burgers with double fried eggs on them. And if you've ever had a delicious burger, that's a delicious burger, and that's a great place to eat.
Well, then I guess I know where my next trip's going to be. My friend FK, it's always great talking to you, not only on the show, but also when we text each other back and forth. We encourage each other's work, and I always appreciate the things you say to help me along too. So, man, when the next books come out, let's come back later this year, bring you back on, let's talk about them.
All right, sounds good.
Thank you, my friend.
Copyright Diego the Podcaster. All content for Let's Find Out is the property of Diego the Podcaster and is served directly from our servers with no modification, redirects, or rehosting. All celebrity impersonators are paid performers. The impersonated celebrities do not endorse or promote any views or opinions expressed by our guests, Diego the Podcaster, or Let's Find Out. The information shared on Let's Find Out with Diego is provided on an as-is basis, with no guarantees of completeness, accuracy, usefulness, or timeliness.